Dan, our good friend from
Hey,
F-Soft
Sony.
Academy. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's like our annual get-together to talk
This
about
is.
another Sony camera.
And you know what? If this keeps up, I'm going to be a happy
Let's
man.
try and go for a hat-trick next year,
All right,
shall we?
let's do it. So last year you introduced us to the FS100,
Right.
And it was an exciting camera. You know, it brought a lot of
have
things
one now.
new. Yeah. Well, that's a rental, but this one I'm going to buy. I know that because you've Sony's just impressed everything out of me, and I have nothing left. So,
Right.
anyways, you've played with it. You've shot with it. Tell us about it. What makes it so amazing?
The key differences in this camera from the FS100 looks very similar on the back. There's something very, very subtle that no one's really talked about. They've raised the profile of the buttons on the side of the camera. Tiny, tiny little thing, but a really, really big advantage. There's now a lock switch. So you know before when you could knock the switches while you were recording, you can lock that and assign different levels of lock to different aspects of the camera. So if you just want to lock everything but the record button, you can. Key difference, of course, is the introduction of the ND filter. Sony have come up with a durable, ultra-thin ND filter, 3 stages, absolutely fabulous. New, robust handle, die-cast handle. I heard someone tell me you could pull a truck with this handle. It's been so engineered. Now, it's a plastic shell, and I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, it's really plasticky, and I've compared this to my EX1. It feels like the same plastic to me. The difference with this is that there's a magnesium alloy shell under the entire camera. So you're talking 8 mounting points beneath, plus the handle on top. You can mount this camera in a number of different ways, throw it around, no problem. 2 more mounting points here. The killer features of this camera are the super slow-mo frame rates. 240 frames a second at 1080. It's clean, we've used it. It's a 4K ready sensor, and I don't know how Sony are getting that 4K down to 1080, but there's no image artifacts. It's a really, really nice image. We did some 200 frames a second footage. In the UK, we don't get 240 frames, we get 200. It is a world camera, so it is switchable. But in 50 hertz, you get 200 frames. We did some shots of the River Thames, really bright sunlight, backlit, looked like it was burnt out. Normally, wouldn't expect to get that detail back. Put it into DaVinci Resolve, pull back 2 stops in the highlights.
Now that is an interesting thing because the FS100, as great as it was, it did have some issues in the highlights. And so you're telling me that this has fixed some of that and it's improved upon it?
We've been in a very fortunate position. Myself and James Tonkin have pretty much a direct line to Japan. And so when we discover issues, we report back. They're always extremely interested to hear user experiences. And yes, the highlight clipping, the highlight roll-off is far superior on this camera. It's a brand new sensor. And I mean, the 4K ready thing, there's an HD SDI port on the rear of the camera now where the second audio port was. It's not enabled yet, but they're expecting to be able to stream 12-bit 4K off this at some point in the future. And I had a conversation with Codex yesterday, and they had a meeting with Sony yesterday to discuss how that's going to happen and whether or not they could work in partnership with them. So what you're getting here for under $10,000 is a 4K ready camcorder, super slow motion at 240 frames a second. It will do super slow motion at 480 frames a second, but what it does is it takes the image is lower resolution, so it's 1920 by 540, and it interpolates up to 1080. When you get to 960 frames, which is almost phantom speed, the resolution does drop quite considerably. It punches into the image, it's quite noisy. But you know, if you don't need HD at those frame rates, if you're doing something for a corporate client, maybe they're doing something where you want to illustrate something in slow motion, it's a lot of functionality to have in the camera.
Our coverage of NAB 2012 is brought to you by Kessler, innovative tools for filmmakers. Lettuce Direct. It's better with lettuce. LettuceDirect.com. Next Lights. Get lit.
And then they've got some really cool functions, like it's an 8 megapixel stills camera, so if you're doing product filmmaking or commercials, you can punch in and take an exact still of the scene, useful for lighting and replicating lighting, and things like face detection. So it's got a neat device where if you're using the K lens here, the kit lens, or alpha lens with the LEA2 adapter, you can use face tracking. So you can actually program it to recognize facial recognition and track faces. And if you need to go run and gun and use autofocus, it'll do that for you. So I think really in in terms of evolution of a camera, a year after the FS100, they've added a lot of the things that we as users were keen to keep. We still have the HDMI port, so you can use HD SDI and HDMI simultaneously. And what we discovered when we were shooting the Versus film, which was the launch film, was that we had an Atomos Samurai plugged into the HD SDI. When you record the slow-mo, you can end trigger, you can start trigger, and then what happens is it buffers. It takes about a minute to buffer the material from the flash memory right to the cards. We were finding we could write the information to the ProRes Samurai at the same time. Now, the Samurai records interlace, so you need to de-interlace it, but some interesting things potentially there to record in ProRes and de-interlace and get even faster frame rates. So I'm pretty pleased. I think it's an exciting little camera. The pictures are nice. That's all that really matters. The pictures are beautiful. It's lightweight. It's compact. I think it's a killer price, and I'd say that Sony have done a great job here.
Now, I see the zoom rocker here. What are your thoughts on that? Are you excited about something like that?
So yeah, brand new handle with an ARRI rosette this time, so it's a lot more solid. There's a zoom rocker on here for a future product. Now I can only guess that they're going to be looking at taking these lenses and adding servo zooms to them, and suddenly you've got a great device. I still wish they'd just turn it on its side and we could shoot like that. I think that would be a really cool camera, handle on the top. But you know, they don't listen to everything we say.
All right, so you've been shooting with this. We talked about the Versus film that you did, which looked fantastic.
Thank you.
And tell us some of the other quirks about it, because like people choose their cameras not just because of what they do, but how they feel and how they're able to work with. Have you found this camera to be easy to use? Were there any concerns that you had?
I mean, you know, it's not the easiest camera to use when you're up high, but then I don't use it naked. I use it with a Zacuto base plate, with a Zacuto EVF. I use an adapter and put my Zeiss CP2s or Zeiss ZFs on it. I use it like a studio camera. So for me, I don't find any problems. I don't see this as a run and gun camera. And I had this discussion on Twitter with someone recently where they were saying, oh, I wish they'd just put a decent viewfinder on it. I like that I can choose what viewfinder and what monitor I put on this camera. To me, it's a lot more versatile. It's a modular system. I like that. Anything I can say about it, really? I mean, I've enjoyed using it, and I like the pictures. I like the functionality, so... Yeah, I mean, I can't really say anything too negative about it. I guess that whole thing, I think the camera should be on its side, with the screen popping out the side.
You can use that, I mean, if you like vertical filmmaking.
But then it would be like a Bolex, and I love that idea of having a camera which is just like this. Viewfinder on the back, I think that'd be really neat. So maybe that'll be my next chat with them.
There you go. You're going to design the Lennie edition?
Well, hopefully.
Our coverage of NAB 2012 is brought to you by Cinevate, tools for filmmakers and photographers. Delaluz, apparel for filmmakers. Zeiss, we make it visible.
All right, so we love the image. Do you think slow-mo is the future of
My worry about slow-mo is it's going to become the new depth of field, the new shallow depth of field. Now we're going to see on Vimeo is 240 frames a second films, which is going to get a bit tiresome. You know, it's like anything, isn't it? If you have a technique, it's going to be overused for a while. But I think if it's used in the right way, it can be very powerful.
Just like DSLRs gave filmmakers control over depth of field, having a camera that gives them the option to shoot at higher frame rates, use that creatively, and not have to be limited to something like a Phantom or a Red.
And the whole 4K thing, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, no one's ever going to be able to display 4K. I think they're missing the point. For me, 4K is about acquiring a 4K image, cutting on a 1080p timeline, and doing digital moves within that line. In the same way that when HD came out, we were cutting on SD timelines and moving the image around. So you can acquire more. And if you ever need to do a 4K master, you can. But I see 4K as acquiring 4K, editing 1080p.
So there's a lot of 4K talk going around. We've seen tons of cameras with 4K, and there isn't really a specified exact understanding of what 4K is going to be. Each company has their own approach to it. Since the FS700 hasn't come out with that 4K feature, do you think Sony's receptive to some of the input based upon what we've been seeing here?
I hope so. I mean, I can only speak from our experience in the UK, and we've had a very, very good discourse with Sony in Japan. They are very, very keen to hear about what users want. And I think that's a huge turning point for an organisation like Sony. They genuinely want to know what a camera should feature. When James and I had the meeting this, and then actually the launch film's got clips of us in the meeting with the guys in the team, they said, so what's your ideal camera? And we said 4K, 200 frames a second at like £5,000, which is like $8,000. And they've come out with something not too dissimilar. And at the time they said to us, anything is possible. Anything is possible. So, you know, I'd say that I would hope they'll do something that's non-proprietary, but who knows? I mean, Sony tend to like to keep things in their own formats. I hope if it's non-proprietary, it makes it much more accessible. And I guess with the announcement of the Blackmagic camera, I would imagine all the camera manufacturers need to take a good look at that, because we all really want Avid DNX or ProRes or, you know, DNG RAW that's a standard, because we spend so much time converting into different NLE systems, different color grading systems, which always degrades the image in some form. If we can start with ProRes or start with a format. Now listen, AVC HD I'm finding to be a very, very efficient codec, but I like the fact that I can record ProRes if I need to.
All right, Dan. Well, thank you very much for the product tour and keeping us updated.
You're welcome.
Now,
You're welcome.
you guys aren't just working on the FS700. You guys have lots of resources for filmmakers as well. Tell us just a brief synopsis of that.
You can find it about me at denlennie.com or fstopacademy.com, where we've got a load of training resources. We've actually started filming the how-to tutorial for this camera, and that'll be out hopefully around about June time when the camera releases.
Great. Exciting stuff.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Stay tuned for more coverage fresh from the floor.